3:40 a.m. Tuesday, November 18, 2025. Port of Pascagoula, Mississippi. 14 HSI agents in tactical gear pressed flat against the east exterior wall of Gulf Tide Frozen Foods. Temperature outside, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the warehouse, -18. 60 meters to the north, a second team held the dockside entrance to Bay 7. The MV Tehran-to-Hormuz sat moored there, a Greek-flagged refrigerated cargo vessel with 17 crew members and 4 containers awaiting offload. Team lead raised 2 fingers. 3 entry teams confirmed position. At 3:42, all 3 entry points went simultaneously. Inside, 96 Iranian-manufactured drone guidance systems, packed inside frozen tuna pallet stacks, sitting on American soil, declared to U.S. Customs as yellowfin steaks bound for Gulf Coast grocery distributors. The temperature inside the main warehouse floor registered -18 Celsius. Agents worked in full tactical gear plus thermal underlay, breath vapor in the flashlight beams, the ambient noise, refrigeration compressors running at full load, the low mechanical hum of cold storage infrastructure that never goes quiet. Between the rows of pallet stacks, floor-to-ceiling aluminum racking, commercially standard, visually indistinguishable from any working freezer warehouse on the Gulf Coast, the guidance components had been sitting in the cold for 72 hours, wrapped in anti-static foam inside black polymer casings, invisible from every angle of approach. The company that owned this warehouse had been importing frozen seafood for 14 years. CBP container scanners had logged their shipments 43 times without flagging a single anomaly. What broke 14 years of cover was one number on a thermal imaging terminal, and a CBP officer who decided it didn't fit. Gulf Tide Frozen Foods was not a shell. It moved real product. It paid real employees. It filed real customs declarations. The smuggling operation stayed hidden because the commercial operation around it was entirely real. The company incorporated in Harrison County, Mississippi in June 2011, bonded customs broker license, current FDA inspection certificate, annual revenue approximately $11.3 million, mid-sized, unremarkable, beneath the threshold of additional regulatory scrutiny, 2 outbound shipments per month to distributors in Mobile, New Orleans, and Houston, 22 employees, 3 reefer trailer bays, the kind of operation that Pascagoula's CBP container scanning system processed and cleared twice a week without remark. Gulf Tide's primary charter vessel, the MV Tehran-to-Hormuz, ran a Caracas to Pascagoula rotation every 6 to 8 weeks. Shipping manifest: frozen yellowfin tuna and hake from South American fisheries. Importer of record: Gulf Tide Frozen Foods. Bonded broker filing agent: Carlos Medina, the company's shipping manager, 9 years in the role. Medina's 2 warehouse leads were brothers. Petros and Vasilis Kourounis had come to Pascagoula through the same Greek maritime shipping network that held a stake in the Tehran-to-Hormuz operating company. They coordinated logistics. In practice, they managed everything that came off the vessel during overnight offload windows. The only Gulf Tide employees permitted to handle Tehran-to-Hormuz cargo during those hours. That restriction had been in place since the company's first Caracas charter. Nobody at CBP or FDA had flagged it. It looked like crew preference. It was operational security. The pipeline hidden inside Gulf Tide had been running since January 2024. An Iranian manufacturing facility in the industrial district south of Tehran, no public commercial listing, no import-export registration in any open-source database, had been producing guidance system components for unmanned aerial vehicles, inertial measurement units, optical seekers, and data link relay boards. The component class was compatible with Iranian-manufactured medium-range drones deployed against Allied maritime targets in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States Navy had been conducting a naval presence operation in that strait since February 2025, following an escalation of drone attacks on commercial tanker traffic. HSI's eventual assessment placed total production from the Tehran facility at more than 400 units across 22 months. 96 of them had arrived at Pascagoula. From Tehran, the components moved by truck into Turkey, then by container ship to Antwerp, Belgium. At Antwerp, cold storage intermediaries unpacked and repacked them inside commercial frozen food pallet stacks at a bonded logistics facility. The documentation listed the contents as yellowfin tuna and hake purchased from a Spanish fishery in Cartagena. The bills of lading were falsified, issued under credentials belonging to a licensed Spanish fishery that had been legally dissolved in August 2024, 3 months before the first fraudulent document was executed. The credentials had not been deactivated in the customs documentation system. The investigative reconstruction of the credential theft came later. Spanish commercial registry records showed the fishery, Pescados del Levante Mediterráneo, had filed dissolution paperwork in June 2024. The owner, a 73-year-old retired trawler operator named Antoni Rossell, had no active online presence and had sold his remaining commercial assets before filing. His customs credentials remain valid in the EU import documentation system for a standard post-dissolution cleanup period. The architects of the Antwerp leg had identified that window, used it, and closed before it expired. From Antwerp, the repackaged pallets moved south by chartered Mediterranean freight to La Guaira, Venezuela's primary commercial port, then overland to Caracas, where a logistics company named Frigorifico Meridional received them at a bonded storage facility. Frigorifico Meridional had 6 years of operating history and 3 legitimate commercial clients. Gulf Tide was the fourth. Nothing in the company's public profile indicated any connection to Iranian supply chains. That connection ran through shell entities registered in Cyprus and the British Virgin Islands, each holding a contractual relationship only with the entity immediately adjacent to it. A horizontal investigation of any single node produced nothing. Penetrating the full vertical chain would have required knowing the chain existed. Gulf Tide did not warehouse the components. That is the detail that kept the American leg invisible for 2 years. When the Tehran crest arrived, the Karounis brothers received the pallet stacks during overnight windows, held them 48 to 72 hours, then transferred the guidance components from sealed inner layers into smaller cargo lots that departed Pascagoula on Caribbean-flagged charter vessels bound for Hormuz corridor contacts. Transit points do not accumulate inventory. They process and move. They look exactly like their cover because their cover is real. CBP container. Officer David Prewitt had worked the non-intrusive inspection shift at Pascagoula for 6 years. He had reviewed more than 22,000 containers and flagged 112. The Gulf Tide container did not initially appear alarming. Exterior scan, clean. Weight, consistent with a commercial frozen seafood load. Manifest documentation, matched. It was the thermal image that stopped him. Frozen protein registers as a consistent cold mass on a thermal scan. Temperature variance inside a properly packed frozen seafood pallet runs within 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, edge to center, without significant vertical differentiation. What Prewitt observed in pallet 14 of container GTSF-8-8-9 was a vertical band of elevated temperature running the full internal height of the pallet, offset 1/3 from the edge, registering 11 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding frozen product along a 17-centimeter column. Frozen fish does not generate a thermal signature. Solid-state electronics can. That pattern, a number that cannot exist in a homogeneous frozen load, is exactly what secondary inspection was designed to surface. Prewitt ran the scan twice to confirm it was not calibration variance. It was not. He filed a secondary inspection request at 12:03 a.m. By 12:15, a physical inspection team had opened the container. Behind approximately 80 kilograms of vacuum-sealed yellowfin tuna blocks in pallet 14, they found a sealed inner layer, airtight black polymer casing, foam padded, with an internal temperature-regulating insert. Inside, 8 rectangular components, individually wrapped in anti-static packaging. Farsi language labels, English technical markings on the bags. One bag read, IMU Assembly, Guidance Series. The inspection team photographed every item in place before removing a single component. Evidence protocol, full digital documentation prior to disturbance. The physical inspection supervisor logged 11 photographs of pallet 14 in disassembly sequence before transferring the interlayer components to an evidence recovery cart. He noted in his field report that the black polymer casing showed no external manufacturer's markings, no shipping label, and no chain of custody documentation of any kind. The outer pallet layer, the vacuum-sealed yellowfin tuna, was commercially standard in every respect. Whatever company had done the packing at Antwerp had been precise. You could not tell from the exterior that anything unusual was present. You had to open it. HSI Mobile received the call at 12:22 a.m., 35 minutes from anomaly detection to federal notification. Resident agent in charge, Teresa Wainwright, reached the port at 1:31 a.m. She had a hard window and a decision that could not be deferred. The Theron Crest berthing authorization at Base 7 expired at 4 a.m. Under standard maritime port protocol, a federal hold request would notify the vessel's captain, and the crew included individuals with operational protocols for exactly this scenario. The 4 encrypted satellite phones later recovered from Medina's safe had been provisioned with remote wipe capability, activated by an outside party in the 11-minute window between the breach and agents reaching his office. Tipping the vessel before the entry would have triggered that protocol before a single piece of physical evidence had been secured. Wainwright had 8 agents immediately available, 3 entry points, 2 active reefer bays, a secondary locked building she had no interior layout for, a crew of 17 aboard the vessel. Standard doctrine called for extended surveillance, full warrant preparation, and additional team assets. None of those options fit inside a 3-hour window without alerting the target. She called FBI Jackson in the Defense Security Service mobile field office at 1:47 a.m. Both agreed to respond. By 2:45 a.m., 22 agents were staged 1 mile from the port perimeter. DSS's presence was a signal. The components carried national security implications beyond routine export control violations. The Defense Security Service does not mobilize for container fraud. If what we've covered so far has you locked in, hit like, because what agents found inside that secondary building wasn't on any manifest. 3 minutes before the breach, there was a problem. The lead team's radio frequency began dropping in and out. The port's automated crane system had entered a pre-dawn cargo relocation cycle on the adjacent container dock, and the crane's electronic control signals were generating interference across the HSI tactical frequency band. Communications between the lead team and the rear exit unit holding the Base 7 gangway dropped for 90 seconds. In a coordinated multi-point entry, 90 seconds of radio blackout is a serious exposure. A delayed entry on one axis while the other 2 proceed creates a visible tactical gap that someone monitoring police frequencies would recognize. The lead coordinator switched all units to a backup frequency at 3:39 a.m. Coordination restored in 45 seconds. The entry schedule adjusted by 40 seconds. All 3 teams confirmed position on the backup frequency. 4 agents from the secondary team had been watching the main warehouse loading dock through thermal optics for 31 minutes at that point. No movement inside, no lights, no evidence of personnel. The Karounis brothers' vehicles, a white Chevrolet Silverado registered to Petros and a gray Ford F-25, registered to a Pascagoula marine supply company owned by a holding entity that agents would spend weeks unwinding, were parked on the south side of the building, where they had been since 11:15 p.m. the previous evening. Medina's vehicle, a black Nissan Pathfinder, was parked at the main office entrance. All 3 vehicles confirmed operational personnel were on site. Nobody was trying to leave. At 3:42 a.m., they went in. The main team breached the primary loading dock with a hydraulic ram. The second team entered through the east personnel door. The third team sealed the Bay 7 gangway and held the Tehran crest. I spent time going through the case file on this operation, and one detail kept standing out above the rest. Not the guidance components, not the Antwerp documentation, the secondary building. The Gulf Tide property included a temperature-controlled storage annex approximately 40 meters east of the main warehouse. Independent power circuit, its own cooling system, its own keyed entry lock. The Gulf Tide shipping manifest listed it as auxiliary cold storage for seasonal overflow product. No cargo in transit had been declared for that building in any of the company's previous 14 CBP filings. Agents breached the annex at 3:51 a.m. The interior had been modified, insulated wall panels on 3 sides, a portable electric space heater running in the northwest corner, maintaining the interior above ambient despite the active cooling system. Standard pallet racking along the north wall. Beneath the racking, a floor panel. Beneath the floor panel, a sealed waterproof compartment. Inside, $740,000 in bundled United States currency. Predominantly $100 bills, banded in uniform increments consistent with organized financial handling. Not personal savings, not a single cash accumulation, but structured bundles of the kind used in systematic cash relay operations. The drone guidance kits were moving east toward Hormuz. The cash was accumulating at Pascagoula and moving in a different direction. Transit points move product. They do not hold currency. A cash compartment in a secondary building means Gulf Tide was performing 2 functions simultaneously: a military hardware relay and a domestic cash distribution node. That is a structural designation, not a passive logistics role. Someone specifically chose this facility to carry both functions for 22 months without either one surfacing in an inspection. Subscribe, because the domestic financial trail the Pascagoula seizure opened did not close with the arrests at this warehouse. The 13 pallet stacks in the main warehouse were searched systematically over the following 23 minutes. All 13 contained guidance components in sealed inner layers, consistent with pallet 14. Full count, 96 units. Tehran manufacturer markings intact on every component. Production date codes across all 96 units, July through October 2025. These were not old components, not surplus, not third country re-exports, manufactured within the previous 4 months and shipped across 3 continents. DSS assessors who examined the components on site in the early morning hours of November 18th made 2 immediate determinations. First, the inertial measurement units were compatible with guidance architecture used in Iranian-manufactured medium-range unmanned platforms, specifically the propulsion and navigation stack associated with platforms deployed against commercial tanker traffic in Hormuz corridor interdictions. Second, the optical seeker assemblies in 8 of the units showed production modifications inconsistent with earlier generation components, indicating ongoing development at the Tehran facility. These were not inventory drawdowns from older production runs. Someone had been refining the design and shipping the current version. Carlos Medina was placed in federal custody at 3:57 a.m., Petros Kourounis at 4:03, Vasilis Kourounis at 4:03 simultaneously, Captain Georgios Anastasiou at 4:11 at the gangway of the Tehran crest. Nobody resisted, nobody ran. Medina asked for an attorney immediately. The Kourounis brothers said nothing. Anastasiou looked at the HSI credential and requested the Greek consul. Medina's office reached through an interior corridor off the main warehouse floor, took 11 minutes to clear and secure. It was a working space, a steel desk with a commercial freight scheduling terminal, filing cabinets, a whiteboard showing the month's incoming manifest schedule, a small personal refrigerator, a framed photograph of a charter fishing trip. Nothing out of place for a shipping manager who had worked in this building for 9 years. The 4 satellite phones were in the safe behind the desk. The safe had a standard commercial keypad lock. Medina had already provided the code, one of the few pieces of information he offered before his attorney arrived. because he understood that the contents of that safe were not the primary problem. The primary problem was what the phones could have told investigators about the network above him. By the time agents opened the safe, the wipe was complete. A search of Anastasiu's cabin produced a handwritten navigation log, not the vessel's electronic record, but a personal mariner's notebook, written in Greek. It showed 7 Caracas to Pascagoula transits in the previous 20 months. The Tehran-Crest's official electronic log showed 4. 3 runs had been deliberately deleted from the official record. The notable aspect of the Gulf Tide operation isn't the concealment method. Frozen food packaging as a carrier for controlled components has precedent in interdiction case history. What's unusual is the financial infrastructure running alongside the hardware pipeline. $740,000 in a false floor compartment means Gulf Tide was performing 2 functions simultaneously. Transit nodes move product. Distribution nodes hold and channel money. Running both operations in one facility without detection for 22 months suggests planning that goes well above the 4 people arrested that morning. By 6 a.m. on November 18th, 4 federal agencies held active roles. HSI Mobile held the scene. FBI Jackson opened parallel inquiries into the Antwerp documentation and the Caracas entity. DSS managed the classification aspects of the seized components. The U.S. Marshal Service was notified regarding vessel forfeiture proceedings. The 4 encrypted satellite phones from Medina's safe had been remotely wiped in the 11-minute window between the breach and agents reaching his office. Not an automatic function, a deliberate activation by an outside party monitoring the operation in real time, executing a pre-positioned destruction protocol. That outside party was not inside Gulf Tide. That outside party had not been identified. The investigation's attempt to trace the Antwerp documentation hit a structural wall within 48 hours. Belgian customs confirmed the bill of lading credentials. They had belonged to the dissolved Spanish fishery. The dissolution process had legally destroyed all the company's commercial records. The credentials had not been flagged inactive in the customs documentation system. The Antwerp cold storage intermediaries who physically packed the pallets operated under a legitimate commercial license with a falsified client authorization and told Belgian investigators they had received the components as commercial fishing gear. The European trail produced containers, no originating entity. Everything traceable had been dissolved or destroyed before the operation began. The concealment method itself isn't particularly sophisticated. What stands out is the preparation, the credential theft from a dissolved Spanish fishery, the multi-layer corporate architecture across 4 jurisdictions, the simultaneous cash relay and hardware transit functions at one facility, the pre-positioned remote wipe protocols on 4 devices. None of this was improvised. It was engineered months or years before the first container moved through Antwerp. Someone invested substantial resources building a pipeline specifically designed to survive contact with American customs interdiction systems. It worked for 22 months. What broke it was not a wire intercept, not a confidential informant, not an undercover operation. It was one CBP officer, one overnight shift, one thermal gradient that did not fit, and a decision to pull the container for secondary inspection. That is the operational margin. Frigorifico Meridional ceased operations in Caracas within 72 hours of the Pascagoula breach. Its registered principals had departed. As of the initial filing date, none had been located. The Cyprus and British Virgin Islands shell entities connected to the Caracas company were both in the process of being wound down, their registered agents citing routine commercial dissolution. The network had an exit protocol. It executed within 72 hours of losing the American node. This is the controversial take. The decision to breach on November 18th, with 8 initial agents, no interior knowledge of the annex, a 90-second communications blackout before entry, and without first expanding surveillance into the domestic financial contacts identified in Medina's secondary device, was the right call operationally, and it was not universally supported at the time. The argument for delay was real. Medina's secondary phone, recovered from the annex floor compartment, had not been wiped. Its contacts pointed toward two U.S.-based entities the government's later filings described as potential domestic cash distribution recipients. Allowing those contacts to operate for 2 to 4 additional weeks while investigators built a surveillance case might have closed a larger portion of the domestic financial network. The argument against delay was equally real. Every additional week of observation was a week in which guidance components compatible with active anti-naval drone platforms could complete additional transit legs toward Hormuz. Wainwright chose to close the hardware pipeline immediately. DSS supported that priority. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, which came onto the case 4 days after the breach, reportedly wanted a delayed approach. They did not get that decision. What do you think? When the choice is stopping the arms flow now or building a larger financial case over additional weeks, which should take priority? The charges were filed on day 4. Carlos Medina pleaded guilty on March 9, 2026, to 1 count of conspiracy to export defense articles without a license under the Arms Export Control Act, 1 count of bulk cash smuggling, and 2 counts of customs fraud. Federal sentencing guidelines recommended between 12 and 16 years. Sentencing was set for July 2026. Petros and Vasilis Kourounis contested all charges. Their attorneys argued the brothers had acted under the direction of the Tehran-Crest's operating company and had no knowledge of the sealed inner pallet layers. The court documents noted that both brothers had been the sole handlers of every Tehran-Crest delivery at Gulf Tide for 4 years, under a restriction that excluded all other employees from overnight offloads. Trial was scheduled for October 2026. Georgios Anastasiou was indicted on 3 counts of maritime smuggling, 1 count of conspiracy, and 1 count of obstruction of justice for the deletion of 3 transit records from the Tehran-Crest's electronic log. His attorney argued the log discrepancy resulted from a technical malfunction in the vessel's recording system. The handwritten personal log recovered from Anastasiou's own cabin, in Greek, documenting all 7 runs, made that argument difficult to sustain. The MV Tehran-Crest was formally seized by the U.S. Marshal Service in January 2026, under federal civil forfeiture statutes. The vessel had been used as an instrumentality in the commission of federal criminal offenses across multiple transits. Assessed value, $14.2 million. The 2 U.S.-based entities identified in Medina's secondary phone contacts, described in the government's filings as potential domestic cash distribution recipients, had not been charged in the initial indictment. Both remained under active investigation. Neither entity's identity appeared in the public court record. The Kourounis brothers were awaiting trial. 2 additional targets were under active federal scrutiny. What those 2 entities had received from the Gulf Tide cash relay during the 22 months of the operation's run had not been publicly disclosed. One detail that stayed with us going through this case: the remote wipe of the 4 satellite phones activated in 11 minutes. Not the fact of the wipe. Pre-positioned data destruction protocols are standard in operations at this level. The response time: 11 minutes from breach to wipe activation means the monitoring function outside Gulf Tide had real-time situational awareness of the federal entry, a pre-built destruction sequence, and the operational discipline to execute it before agents reached the office. This was not a panicked individual reacting to news. This was a protocol running on schedule. That person has not been identified. They were not in Pascagoula. They may not have been in the United States. A supply pipeline engineered across Tehran, Antwerp, Caracas, and Pascagoula is not operated from a freezer warehouse in Mississippi. The architects of that infrastructure are elsewhere. They knew the American node was gone 11 minutes after the door opened. They closed what they could close within 72 hours. Put yourself in Prewitt's position at 11:47 p.m., 1 scan among dozens that shift, 1 anomalous number on a terminal, 1 call to make about whether to flag it or mark it as equipment variance and move on. Most of the time, that call is routine. Most of the time, the number is a calibration artifact. This time, it was not. The pipeline that had been routing guidance components toward Hormuz-bound vessels for 22 months cracked on that single decision. Whether a replacement structure was already being built before the Pascagoula breach, whether the architects of this network had redundancy nodes staged and ready, is a question the public record does not answer. Comment yes or no. Do you think the network had a backup route running before this seizure? 96 guidance units seized on November 18, 2025, at the port of Pascagoula. Estimated total network value, $58 million. 3 runs deleted from the Tehran-Crest electronic log. 3 transits for which there is now no official record of what arrived at Base 7 or where it went. The Tehran facility's documented production output across the same 22-month window exceeded 400 units. The arithmetic on what did not pass through Pascagoula has not been publicly resolved. The network is dismantled on the American side. The demand that created it still exists. And the people who built it knew it was gone 11 minutes after the door opened. Subscribe. The next case in this series starts where this one ends.